Hey there, Björkman here, founder of Audio Issues and author of Step by Step Mixing. Today, I wanted to talk to you about how to use EQ to get a better drum mix. Before we continue, please like and subscribe. And if you would like my 7-step mix translation cheat sheet so that you can get your mixes sounding good on any speaker system you play them through, please go to mixfinisher.com and download it there. Once again, I'm here to help you confidently finish your mixes so that you can be proud to release your records. And if you're working with a lot of drums, one of the ways to make a good drum sound is to use EQ. So knowing your way around the EQ is a very important aspect of getting a great drum mix going. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the various frequency areas that we have that can help you shape your drum sound. So let's talk about the kick drum EQ first. The happy medium in a kick drum sound is sort of a thick bass thump and a driving click from the beater, so it cuts through that mix. That snap or that click from the beater needs to cut through the mix so that you can hear it. In some genres, this is more apparent than others. It doesn't always have to have, and you definitely don't necessarily EQ a kick drum the same way in every genre or even in every song. So different genres have different drum EQs, but those two areas are sort of universal when it comes to a good kick drum sound. So let's talk about the low end, the 50 to 100 hertz area. So you want to boost that if you need more low end punch. However, beware of boosting too much because it can clutter up your low end and get in the way of other instruments that are occupying this spectrum. So let's just take a quick listen to that. Hear how that adds more low end weight, and the higher it gets to 100, the sort of toppier the low end becomes. Obviously, if you're listening to this on Apple earbuds or on your iPad speaker, you're not going to be hearing a lot of difference. So make sure you use headphones when you are listening to these audio examples. And then continuing on about 150 to 200 hertz or so. If you're worried about boosting the low end too much because you think the kick drum is already pretty thick, you actually might want to try cutting in this area because there might be some potential boominess here that, if cut, will allow that low end to stay thick and smooth without feeling like it's covering up the low end. So let's hear sort of 150 to 200 area here. So you can hear when I cut it, it smooths out that low end a little bit. All right, moving on. So 300 to 600 hertz. This is the infamous cardboard box sound or boxiness. If boxiness is plaguing your kick drum, cut somewhere in this area. These drums are actually pretty well recorded, so there's not a ton wrong with them or really anything in that for that matter, but you still want to be able to EQ your drums to make sure that they sound as good as you want them to. So let's hear the boxiness area. And as you can hear, by cutting that, you smooth out the kick drum a little bit more too. And then we moving on up to 2 to 4 kilohertz. That's sort of where the beater lies. So you'll get more snap out of the beater by boosting in that area. And then above that, not a lot going on, honestly. Sometimes there's just more snare drum bleed than anything else. So you might actually not need to do anything to this area, and you can often just filter down to 10K. that can very easily clean up some of the high-end bleed that's coming into your kick drum. So if we put all this together, let's combine all these tricks and hear how that sounds. Let's put automatic level matching here. And then I had this going on, and then I think it was cutting in about here. So let's just assume that this is sort of stereotypical kick drum shape, but you shouldn't mix with your eyes, you should mix with your ears, but this is oftentimes what you'll end up with. So more low end, less boxiness, a little more snap from the beater. That's what you want out of your kick drum sound, at least in this case. So many of these guidelines actually work for every drum. Thickness in the lows around that area, body and weight in the low mids, uh, attack and beater sound or snap from the drum in the high mids. But let's move on to the snare so that you can see a few more examples. So in this case, I did a little bit of pre-EQing. First of all, I filtered up to 100. Can often be good just by getting rid of the low end of the bleed of the kick drum sometimes. And then there's really nothing below 100 hertz that's necessary for the snare often, I believe. And then if you want more weight, if your snare sounds too thin and need some extra weight, adding some 150 hertz or so can easily thicken things up. And then at 500, you can add more sort of power to it or sort of more body. It's not thickness, it's more like body. It's a better way to put it. Sort of the fundamental frequencies there around 500 gives the snare sort of a rounder sound. And then 3K adds clarity and punch, but often can also increase the hi-hat sound if you are recording a live drum where there's hi-hat bleed. And then the same with 10K or above, which is quote-unquote air. That's where you will also increase probably the high-end frequencies that from the cymbals and the hi-hats that are bleeding into the snare drum mic. So, but let's and then in this case, I found a ringing resonance, using sort of a seek and destroy EQ method, and then I cut that down. So I'll show that to you first, and then I'll show you these boosts, so you can get a sense of what you can expect from EQing the snare drum. So as you can hear, the ringing is gone there in the 300 hertz area, 346 hertz to be exact. And there's a little more thickness, a little more power or body, and then there's a little more high mids and high end. All right, and then moving on to the toms. Toms are relatively simple to EQ. Actually, the hardest part is usually just finding where the drummer is playing them, because if you don't have a tom-heavy song, you're going to have to find a loop that is probably pretty short, and you'll get pretty tired of listening to just a quick 3-second loop of, of your toms. It can drive you crazy. But basically, there's a 3-step process to it. It's just reducing boxiness, increasing heaviness in the lows, and then getting that attack from the sticks, from the drummer hitting the drum. And let's just show you that. And then I'm filtering up to about 50 hertz. You can filter, depending on the size of the tom, you can filter out maybe all the way to 80 to 100, depending on what kind of tom it is. If it's a really small tom, it's gonna it's gonna be there's not gonna be a lot of stuff going on in the very, very lows. But in this case, just there's some boxiness here that I'm reducing. So let's hear that. So that's already sounding better. And then I'm gonna add some highs and some lows too. So let's do that. So not a lot more to it in that way, other than you might need to gate the toms to get rid of the bleed from the rest of the drums, because now you're actually adding this EQ curve to anything else that tom mic is hearing, but both the cymbals and the snare and the kick. So it might not be the best for the rest of the kit. So you might want to clean that up if it matters or if it sounds bad. But let's hear before and after here just real quick. So thicker and less boxy and a little more attack. And then when you come to the overheads, let's look at the overheads here. So when you tackle the overheads, I like taking sort of a master EQ approach when it comes to overheads. You can bust them together, of course. So if this is a left overhead and this is a right overhead, I would create a new track. I would create a bus here and make this be bus 2, for instance, and then I'd route that to one bus so that I don't have to independently EQ each overhead. Unless you really, really need to, unless there's a harshness in a certain overhead that isn't in another, or you need to bring out a specific drum or bring out a specific frequency in one overhead mic and not in the other. Obviously, you should check that out if you need to, but in this case, I'm just going to route them together and do it that way. On the Space Designer, I want the EQ here. All right, so let's hear that. So if you have just the overheads, for instance, you don't want to do a lot of filtering because that's where your kick drum sound is going to be. And in that case, you just want to filter out just a little bit, maybe to 30, 32 or so, and then do slight boosts and cuts to create the best overall sounding EQ. This means maybe adding slight low end boosts to bring out the kick drum, reduce some of the overall boxiness in 400, 3 to 4, 500, and then add presence in the air and maybe some attack in the high mid. So let's do that real quickly. So that's overall pretty clean, or a little bit cleaner. Less boxiness. There was some weird resonance here that I quickly took out. And then I just added an overall shelving boost there in the lows just for fun. And then I added some attack and some air here. So that's one way to do it if you want to kind of go with the master EQ approach. But then if you just want to do treat them as if they're only cymbals, and not you don't want to use them to accent the kick drum or the snare or anything like that. You can just filter it out even further, maybe up to about 250, and you can actually leave this in And that'll sound like this. So not really great, but if you combine it with the kick and the snare, it'll be a lot better. You can even go crazy and cut even more or filter out even more in the overheads. So that's sort of the overall drum EQ guide that I hope you found useful. If you want more stuff like this, please like and subscribe and watch the next videos. And then if you want my mix finisher formula so that you can get your mixes sounding great on every speaker system you play them through, go to mixfinisher.com and download my mix translation cheat sheet there. Once again, I'm Björkman from Audio Issues, author of Step by Step Mixing. Thanks for watching.